we we want to get to that place where we completely release our attachment to a delusive clinging to this idea of ourself as a separate entity from everything else. And I don't have time to go into the whole meaning of non-self, but it is a misunderstood idea, because in English language it sounds like non-self means you don't exist, but that's not the meaning. It means that you're not a separate, solid entity, but that you are always permeable in many, many aspects, and that you are not just what you think of as just this body and mind, because who you really are also includes the whole universe. Because without everything else, how could you exist as this? You see? Just like, and even when I talk about my breathing, I mean, that's why I think breath meditation is such an important part of many Buddhist meditations. I think it's because the breath is a very tangible way of helping you realize that you're more than just this. Because when you really realize the miracle of the breath, you realize that, well, the breath is made of air, which has oxygen in it, and the oxygen comes from plants. So without those plants, I can't exist. Because I can't exist without oxygen, and I can't exist without the air. And so then the plants are part of me too. There's this non-separation of this existence and that existence. So, and then of course you meditate even more, you start realizing, well, that plant couldn't exist without other things happening on the planet, which correspond to other things happening in the solar system, which correspond to other things happening in the galaxy, which correspond to other things happening in the whole universe, and time, space, continuum, and energy, matter, consciousness. I mean, everything makes everything else possible. So therefore, I'm not really a separate small self.
Right.
Because my true self is the entirety of existence. That includes everything. We do try to steer a middle path. So there is truth in the selflessness and non-self teaching. And there's also truth in the self-teaching, which is, you know, self-reliance and independence and individualism. There's a truth there too. It's just that sometimes people go to extremes, you know. For example, if you misunderstand selflessness to mean that you're not worth anything, or that the individual is not worth anything, and that the individual really should always sacrifice for the greater whole, it can lead to an extremism, such as you find in some Asian cultures in history, and, well, I guess European cultures too, where the individual is not important. You know, it has to be always sacrificed for the country. You know, you saw some of this in Nazism too. I mean, but I think that's unhealthy. Now, on the other extreme, we have a modern American kind of, you know, self is the most important thing. You know, my rights are most important, and all of that. And of course, there's a truth there. However, I think in its extreme, it's not healthy, because it's not in harmony with the greater health of the whole. Because, you know, you can pursue your own individual rights and happiness all you want, but sometimes the choices you make aren't good for the rest of the world. Sometimes the choices you make harm others. So it's important to balance this, you see. I think a balance of the teaching of selflessness and the teaching of a healthy sense of self in harmony with each other would be the best. It's a middle path, so that, yeah. People today are looking for something real. They were looking for something that's not just theory, not just doctrine, not just something someone else is telling them about, but something they can actually experience, that actually effectively transforms their consciousness, that they can really feel that. And of course, I truly am a very interfaith kind of person, so even though I'm practicing Buddhism as my main path, I do believe that there are real, genuine, authentic practices in every tradition, including Christianity. But unfortunately, in our modern times, many people don't know how to access that, because a lot of the times the leaders never learned it either. They go to seminary or some sort of training. Very few of these training schools have meditation on the curriculum, or mindfulness as one of their class titles. It's very rare. So it's hard for the common spiritual seeker to find this, because those who are meant to be our leaders, they didn't get it either, and it goes back centuries. However, if you dig deep enough in each tradition, including Christianity, you will find the genuine, powerful practices of meditation being taught. Maybe sometimes taught way out on an island or a mountain in a little monastery somewhere, but someone knows it and hopefully has been passing it down. And it's our responsibility to find those genuine teachers of meditation and mindfulness in our traditions, and revive it so that it becomes something more accessible to more people. Because without meditation and mindfulness, our religious traditions are very dry and very shallow. In Christianity, Jesus had disciples. In other words, people that would follow him, live with him, eat with him, experience life with him, be close up with him, because you don't just learn from a teacher's words. You learn from a teacher's actions, as well as the way they do things and the energy in which they do things. That's why I so appreciated the opportunity to meet Thich Nhat Hanh, because before that, most of what I had read about mindfulness, meditation, and Buddhism was just a theory in my head. He made it real because he embodies it. So at this retreat, afterwards, I couldn't believe my mind could feel so expansive, like the sky. I never had felt my mind like that. The only time closest to that was maybe a few years before. I had gone camping with a friend, and we had agreed not to speak very much during the whole 3-day experience, and just listen to the sounds of nature. And I remember sitting on the hill overlooking the valley at the end of our experience, and just feeling a little spaciousness in my mind. And it was very similar to that, but times 10 after this retreat. I didn't realize you could actually feel that way in your mind, that it doesn't have to feel like it's confined or constricted inside the head. It actually can feel very, very spacious, like the sky. I mean, who knows what he exactly said? But that's why I'm more inclined to be a Zen Buddhist, because Zen Buddhism isn't so much concerned with the exact words of what Buddha said, because, well, there's no way for us to really know. Because no one can prove or disprove any text that you have today, which is true for Christianity and Judaism and any other, and Islam too. They just maybe don't want to admit that. But in Buddhism, at least in Zen, we admit we can't know 100% for sure if the texts we have today have been completely unchanged from the very moment the Buddha spoke them. I mean, who knows? So what matters is practicing meditation enough that we get to the spirit of the Buddha within us, and our mind becomes pure and refined, and then we see things from a pure and refined way. And then we can read the texts, and we can look at the traditions that have been passed down, and we can examine them from this pure, refined consciousness. And that's the true Buddha. That's the true teachings of the Buddha. It's in here when we are open to that pure, refined mind that's the potential within everyone. And then we can re-examine. And not just by ourselves, but with enlightened others in community. I think community examination of truth is also very important. So you have to have that balance of the individual and the community. It has to be balanced when we look at truth. Otherwise, either someone who has a good idea is squelched by the community, or the individual kind of goes off from the community and starts a cult. I mean, so you see the extremes. But with the individual and the community working together, meditating, purifying the mind so that we can look at these things, it's more likely that we will be able to differentiate what is really the truth and what is just cultural prejudices that are accumulations over time. I think that if we could do that in Buddhism and Christianity and everything else, we would go very far in transforming the world. But if Buddhists get too clingy to their rituals and their statues and their robes and their way of doing things that are not necessarily essential to Buddhism, then they're not really practicing Buddhism, because Buddhism teaches non-clinging, you see? So Buddhists have to be careful not to cling too. On the other hand, some Buddhists are trying to be so essentialist that sometimes I think that their kind of Buddhism is a little flat, a little dry, a little boring. There's no color to it. There's no music to it, no joy to it. So you have to be careful, because if you're only essentialist, it's like serving plain rice as a gourmet meal. It's like kind of boring. Add a little spice to it, do something with it. Make it a little bit more pleasant and enjoyable and creative. So that's what I'm trying to do here, and that's what my teacher Thich Nhat Hanh's doing. He's taking the essentials, but keeping some of the flair and color too, at least the parts that can still be somewhat relevant to Western people. And he's willing to let go of the other stuff. And I'm trying to do the same thing.